Yeah.
No problem. All right. Hello, guys. So today's topic, we're going to start with types of memory for today's practical. Just give me a minute, okay? Sorry about that. Okay. So there are, as we all know, there are four types of memory: sensory memory, short-term memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Most of us know working memory and short-term memory. Almost all of us know that short-term memory and working memory are almost one and the same thing. So let's go in order. Let's see sensory memory first. So sensory memory is a very brief memory that allows people to retain certain impressions or sensory information after the original stimulus has been received and stopped. Okay. The time that is taken for this to be forgotten is 3 seconds. That means whatever sensory information that we get, it is retained in our brain only for 3 seconds. So according to what is written here is sensory memory is a very brief, about 3 seconds it says, recall of sensory experiences such as what we saw or heard. Some compare sensory memory to a quick snapshot of what you just experienced and it quickly disappears. Next, we move on to short-term memory. Short-term memory is the reproduction, recognition, or recall of a limited amount of material after a period of about 10 or 30 seconds. That means whatever we have heard or whatever we have seen or whatever we have understood, whatever it is only there for about 30 seconds. After that it starts dissipating. And before we move on to the working memory, I forgot to tell you that there are 5 types of sensory memories, or memory is related to the 5 senses that we have. That is haptic, that is related to touch, echoic, which is related to hearing, iconic, which is related to sight, olfactory, as we know, smell, and gustatory, that is related to taste, that is the tongue. We'll move on to the working memory. Working memory is basically like a sticky note that we in our brains. That means when we're working on something and we need to remember a particular word or a particular task that we need to do, what do? We take out a sticky note and write it on it, stick it in a place that we will see and we will remember. So working memory is similar to that. It is a temporary sticky note that is in our brain. It is a skill that lets us work with information without losing track of what we are doing. So it helps us keep a track of all the stuff that we're doing. Okay, some researchers use the term working memory and distinguish it from short-term memory through two overlap. Though the two overlap, working memory can be defined as the ability of our brains to keep a limited amount of information available long enough to use it. Just a second, guys. Thank you. And okay, where were we? Working memory helps us process thoughts and plans, and it helps us carry out our ideas. You can think of working memory as your short-term memory, which is combined with strategies and knowledge from your long-term memory bank to assist in making decisions or calculations. Working memory has been connected to executive functioning, which is often affected in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Now, the last of our types of memory is our, okay, before we move on, working memory, an example for working memory is when we are sitting in our math class as kids, and when the teacher talks about numbers, suppose say she says add 8 plus 5, you can see the number in your head, right? Whatever the teacher is talking about, you can literally visualize it in your head. That is particularly your working memory. Next, we move on to the long-term memory. This refers to the storage of information over an extended period of time. Sorry. Long-term memory encompasses memories that range from a few days to a few decades. In order for successful learning to take place, information has to move on from your sensory and short-term memory to your long-term memory. Now, your Atkinson's stage model of memory, your Wog and Norman's theories of primary and secondary memory, all are talking about this particular process where your information from your sensory and short-term memory moves on or is transferred to your long-term memory. Now, all this is, we are talking about memory itself, right? There is something called as memory loss where we forget stuff. Now, causes for memory loss do not have to always relate to some disease. Aging and stress or lack of sleep, all these can also be reasons for memory loss. Now, there are some memory disorders and conditions that we have to learn about. And the first among them is dementia. What is dementia? It is a generalized or pervasive deterioration of memory along with at least one cognitive function such as language, and also an executive function such as planning, problem solving, decision making, etc. Okay. The loss of it is also the loss of intellectual abilities which is severe enough to interfere with the individual's day-to-day functions. I'll just make this clear again. So it is a general loss or deterioration of memory, which also comprises of loss of a cognitive function, at least one cognitive function, and which also takes along with it an executive function. So your thinking process, your creative processes, all these are your cognitive functions, right? Right. Your language also is your cognitive function. An executive function like planning or decision making, all these go along with it. This is dementia. Okay. Next, we move on to Lewy body dementia, or I don't think I've written Alzheimer's. Okay, I'll come back to Alzheimer's in a little bit. We'll move on to dementia with Lewy body. Uh, Lewy body dementia is where protein deposits called Lewy bodies develop inside the nerve cell of the brain region, in the brain region, which involves thinking, memory, movement, or something which controls your motor skills, right? So the way you stand, the way you sit, all that is controlled by a certain motor, a particular part of your brain which controls these motor skills. Then there, when protein deposits called Lewy bodies are formed, these controls are lost. So with that comes memory loss and all that. Frontotemporal dementia. It is an uncommon type of dementia that causes problems with behavior and language. It is majorly in your frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, as it is in the name itself, frontotemporal. Mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is an early stage of memory loss or other cognitive ability loss, such as language, visual and spatial perception, and things like that. These people can still perform their day-to-day activities independently, but they'll stop remembering stuff as well as they used to. Okay. Next, we move on to HIV dementia. This is a dementia that is occurring due to the spread of HIV to the brain. So when the HIV reaches the person's brain, it results in encephalopathy. It is a general term which describes a disease that affects functions and structures of your brain. Next, we move on to normal pressure hydrocephalus. It is an abnormal buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain inside its ventricles or cavities. This happens when there is a blockage in the normal flow of the CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. Now, if people are there who might not know this, but there is a certain amount of liquid that protects our brain from our skull, because if when we move, if the brain goes and hits the skull, the brain gets damaged. To avoid this, there's a small or thin layer just between your brain and your skull. That goes down till your spinal cord. Now that is a cerebrospinal fluid, and it helps protect the brain. If this is leaking into your brain cavities, into your sinus cavities and all that, that is when this problem called normal pressure hydrocephalus is caused. Next, we move on to vascular dementia. It is a severe loss of cognitive functions which result from the cerebrovascular disease. Okay, a repeated strokes or a large stroke is generally a cause of this particular disease. It is also known as a infarct dementia. Okay, Alzheimer's, I'll come back to Alzheimer's by the time you people take up the next few things, okay? Guys?
Thank you, Vasudha. Yeah, that's okay. All right, who's gonna talk about IQ now?
So it is me. I'm there in the call. So
Hey, Praveen.
can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, IQ is nothing but an intelligence quotient. So it is used to measure certain cognitive abilities, like the person's reasoning ability, or how well he can actually judge the situation, how well he can utilize logic to solve questions, and it also it involves IQ tests do involve solving certain puzzles, solving certain mathematical problems, and also certain verbal aspects to it. So it is overall what it is measuring. It's a person's ability to actually deal with various cognitive abilities. So that's exactly what IQ tests are really aiming at. So there are multiple ways of measuring it, which we are going to anyway go through in the next answer. But overall, I think most of us has got some idea in terms of what IQ is. It's a reasoning ability, right? And it also there is a link with the memory as well, as far as this reasoning ability is concerned, both the short-term memory and long-term memory. But here the main question is about what exactly is the IQ. So in the next question, we'll go through how exactly IQ can be measured and what are the various various tests that are actually associated with it. So it's question number 21. So you can actually go to question number 21. Okay, while you are going, I'll give the context behind it. So now we understood what the IQ is all about. So the next thing is, what are the various tests that are available to measure the intelligence, right? So when it comes to intelligence, there are actually multiple factors that you need to consider when you are actually measuring this intelligence, right? So for example, you can't really have the same test for the kids and the same test for the adults, because kids intelligence might be little different when compared to what the adults would be. So age is one factor. Similarly, when you are trying to actually judge the intelligence in certain scenarios, where you are trying to judge the intelligence of a with a differently abled person, right? I mean, for example, whatever the various kind of problems that they could have, I mean, learning ability and various other things, right? I mean, while you are assessing a person who is differently abled, so you might really want to judge their intelligence in a different way. So depending upon the scenario by scenario, there are various popular tests which are available. So some of them are applicable to adults, some of them are applicable to children, some of them are applicable to differently abled ones. So there are few common, intelligence tests which I would actually try to describe at a very high level. One is cognitive assessment system. So here, what exactly this cognitive assessment system is doing, it is mainly concentrating on the past theory. So it is actually mainly judging the cognitive abilities. So it doesn't really go through the similar question pattern as whatever that we have done, which is Stanford Binet intelligence test, one of the intelligence tests that we have actually went through, which is having various types of questions in terms of whether it is a language-based ability or whether it is a problem solving and various other questions that we went through that in that particular GMT, right? So that is Stanford Binet intelligence scale. So where it is generally used for people with which are of from 2 years to 23 years kind of an age. So that is exactly what is the age group this particular test is done on. So for kids who are actually less than or who are very young, for them there is a separate test called as Kaufman assessment.
Hello.
Praveen, okay. Yeah, I
Are
couldn't.
having disadvantage in terms of verbal skills, right?
Praveen, could
Yeah.
you repeat Kaufman onwards because we lost you there? Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay. So yeah, Kaufman assessment battery for children is generally aimed at kids who are as young as 3 years. So these tests would have a different set of questions which can be answered by children. So this is something which is very much oriented towards measuring the intelligence in the kids. So it might not have as complex questions as whatever that we have seen in Stanford Binet intelligence test, right? So that is Kaufman assessment battery for children. So the next one is universal nonverbal intelligence test. So universal nonverbal intelligence test is oriented for people who does have disadvantage in their verbal and language abilities. So so for the people who does have certain disabilities associated with the verbal and language, that is when this particular test is used, and it is used from 5-year-old till 17-year-old kind of age group. So this test is used between this particular age. And there is one more test, which is Wechsler's intelligence scale for children. This is again for children, but here the concentration is on the disabilities. So this is for relevant for the kids who have learning disabilities or dyslexia or various other disabilities which are associated with the intelligence. This is exactly the test that is used in this particular case. Okay, and the last one is Woodcock-Johnson test for cognitive abilities. So this does have wide variety of tests, which actually pretty broad, covering various cognitive abilities, whether it is academic ability or domain specific ability or how the cognitive functions really work. So it does have some 80-odd tests, quite a lengthy test as such, which goes very detailed in measuring various types of cognitive abilities. So whereas Wechsler's intelligence case also has got a different things to be measured. I think it measures around 5 different aspects of the cognitive domain, but it is oriented towards only to assess with the children with certain disabilities on. So these are various, these are few of those particular intelligence tests. So these are commonly used intelligence tests. So this is not just there are quite a few intelligence tests that are there used in different scenarios and to measure different aspects of cognitive skills. These are like handful of them which are like very prominent. Otherwise there are quite a few existing as far as the intelligence is concerned. You would have already seen, even while writing the practical, the definition of intelligence itself is a questionable aspect which is not defined uniformly across. So obviously the way to measurement would also be not uniform across. So because there is quite a lot of opinions in terms of what is intelligence and how it can be measured. So all these tests do do have various aspects that they would be measuring. So they would not be measuring the same common things, but yeah, but depending on the scenario, depending on the age group, we'll have to use the right test to do the test, do measure the intelligence. So any questions on IQ and intelligence test?
No.
Okay, so let me continue the flow into the wisdom aspect, right? I mean, wisdom aspect is little tricky, which has got especially on the old age wisdom. So I could actually get some content in our IGNOU textbook itself, and also get few interesting aspects from outside, right? I mean, so if you actually talk about old age wisdom as a question, right? I mean, there are two aspects to that particular entire problem. One is we need to understand what is wisdom, and then we can go into details in terms of what exactly that comes as far as the age is concerned, right? I mean, what is wisdom? So wisdom can be defined like it's a practical knowledge where, I mean, it's an ability using which you can apply the knowledge in the real-time scenarios, right? So it can be even the creativity can come from the wisdom. So your emotional maturity can also come from the wisdom. So this is like a core part which is using the knowledge whatever that you have, right? I mean, this is the skill where you would really know how to utilize your knowledge. So this can actually be related to anything related to your life, where you understand people using your wisdom, you deal with their emotions using the wisdom, or else it can even come from the point of view of, okay, you are taking certain decisions, where in most of the situations, there is no perfect solution that is there, right? Even there is a situation where there is no perfect solution, you are able to utilize your knowledge to arrive at a particular solution, which is more pragmatic or better suit in the overall situation, whatever that you are actually trying to solve it, right? I mean, you are using your wisdom, you are able to understand the situation, and also you are able to judge what exactly that you can actually apply during that time, right? So this can also be come into picture when it comes to values. So if you are, I mean, your wisdom is going to assist you in terms of how exactly you need to respect values, respect rules, how to actually show the empathy. All these aspects really come from the wisdom point of view. So there are various aspects which actually constitute a wisdom, right? I mean, net to net, what you can say is it's like a practical use of knowledge in the right direction. So that is what you can say it as wisdom. So now so having said that, right, so that is how the wisdom is defined. Now comes to the question of how exactly you can apply to the old age. So what exactly happens in old age? Does wisdom improve over old age? Yes, it does actually increase over old age, because obviously there are so many experiences and so many scenarios that the age would really would introduce. So wisdom do increase over age, right? So it is because the overall grasp of situations, overall understanding that you have on the situations do actually grow as you age. But now comes to the question, right? What about your reasoning ability, right? So yes, you do have experience which is coming over the years, and that would improve your decision taking abilities. But also the wisdom part or the practical use of knowledge comes on the reasoning side. So what happens to the reasoning part of it? So this reasoning part of it, or rather relationship and solving the problems, is called as fluid intelligence. So what is observed is generally as age grows up, fluid intelligence comes down. So basically your ability to see new patterns, your ability to solve problems, right, or rather your reasoning ability comes down over the age. Whereas there is another aspect which we are talking about from the experience point of view, which is called as a crystallized intelligence. So this intelligence is about, okay, you are able to make decisions because you can accumulate information from various sources. So you are able to connect to the problem well because you have seen so many situations before, and you are able to actually say, no, yeah, this is what happened somewhere else, and this is what happened somewhere else. I'll combine all my experience and I'm able to actually arrive at solving the problem. This crystallized intelligence grows. So as you actually age, the crystallized intelligence really grows over the time. Fluid intelligence reduces. So I mean, both are actually required from a wisdom point of view, but overall, whatever that age brings up as a disadvantage from the fluid intelligence, actually crystallized intelligence makes up for it. So you can overall say that as age grows, wisdom also grows, because the aspect of really crystallized intelligence would act upon as far as this wisdom is concerned. It is also that various experiments proved that this, whatever the cognitive performance which we talked about as fluid intelligence, right, even this can be regained. So there are certain training exercises which are proven, saying that okay, from in 40 to 60% of elderly people, they can reverse whatever that the performance down that decline. So basically what test says is, whatever the disadvantage that we talked about as fluid intelligence, where the brain power reduces, even that can be repaired by doing certain kind of remedial training. Okay, so even I saw a few interesting videos on the same aspect. One of that I sent over study group as well, where the gist of that particular video is, there is some experiment which researcher has done in terms of the ability to see the experiment that they did is, they actually took younger generation and they took older generation, and they have shown various faces, right? I mean, so basically what they have shown is, they have shown faces of various people and asked people to guess their age. By seeing the picture, participants have to guess their age. Okay, and what they observed is, the younger population, whoever is in their young age, they are not able to guess the age of the image in a better way when compared to the older age. So older age people were able to actually guess the age of the person by just seeing the image, and they were able to guess in multiple categories. They were able to say that okay, this person might actually be from 20 to 30, this person might be from 40 to 50, this person might be from 60 to 70. They are able to actually judge age in much more categorized way when compared to younger people. Younger people, most of the younger people tend to actually categorize people like, okay, yeah, this face is young, this face is old. They had either this way or that way. They were not able to actually categorize it in such a way as the older people really could. So what research concluded is, the pictorial intelligence or pictorial whatever the aspect which is associated, which the pictorial connection that you could actually make, older people has got a better connection with them, right? So this is something that that over the period, the experience or exposure to various things would have actually brought up. So that's about old age wisdom. So any doubts, or am I clear?
That was very nice. Thank you, Praveen. Very easily understandable.
Okay. So
That's the
yeah,
reason
do you
our
want me to continue one more on the variables, or you want to go through the other ones? So there is one more
Yes.
on types of variables, where I can cover what these particular variables are and what types are there.
I think you can finish your topic, no?
Yeah, I can do that. So one more question is on variables and the types of variables, right? So variables are nothing but the one which varies. I mean, right from the name of it, variable is nothing but what varies is variable. So what are the types of variables? So types of variables are defined from various categories point of view. So for example, depending upon the type of the value, whether the variable is of a mathematical value, or whether the variable is of categorical value, or the variable is continuous, or variable is having an absolute zero. Can it be multiplied with another variable? So using the nature of data, there is a categorization. Okay, so there is quantitative, there is qualitative. Okay, similarly, even under quantitative, there are few categories. Qualitative has got few categories like nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. So I would not really explain each type of the variable, but I'll just put the overall gist in the way that it is categorized. So based on the type of the data, there is a categorization, and this particular categorization is qualitative, quantitative, and interval, ratio, and all those stuff, right? So similarly, what is the role that particular variable is playing in the experiment? Even there is a categorization. So for example, if this particular variable is the dependent variable, which is dependent on your experiment, so you are actually doing some experiment, and based on certain changes in your experiment, this value is changing, right? So this is a dependent variable. So independent variable is the one which you are actually controlling the experiment on. So if you are actually controlling certain aspects of your experiment, which is indirectly giving you a result, that indirect giving of result is a dependent variable. The one which you are actually controlling is an independent variable. Rather, you are actually making changes on the independent variable, and dependent variable is changing because of that, right? So whole aspect is how exactly that is being used in your experiment really has got certain types of variables. Okay, so that is, and the other types is, okay, yeah, whether it is, so there could be certain variables which are not really part of your experiment, but still can affect your experiment. So those are extraneous variables. So basically they are outside your experiment, but still they can actually affect it. So similarly, there is another type of variable which is like active and attribute. Whether are you really actively changing this particular variable? Are you manipulating this variable, or automatically you are it is something that you can't really change it? For example, you want to actually check something like measure how many times somebody coughs depending upon his smoking habit, right? So can you actually go and so it is about you choosing the crowd, saying that, okay, I will take the crowd who actually smokes, I'll take a crowd who doesn't smoke, and then measure number of coughs. But you can't really, in the experiment, you can't really change. You can't really ask that person that, okay, yeah, you drink 20 cigarettes today, I'm going to measure the cough. Then your experiment might not really come out well. So in certain experiments where you might actually end up having to choose something that the variable which is not, you are not manipulating during the experiment. It is already you are selecting the crowd where it suits your experiment, right? So there is a categorization there, which is like active variable, attribute variable, right? Similarly, the experiment type is also going to judge in terms of types of variables. So there are, I mean, net to net, what I wanted to tell is there are huge variety of variable types which are there. Okay, depending upon the role of the experiment, the role in the experiment, depending on the nature of the data, depending upon what is the effect that it is going to cause to that particular experiment, okay, and what level of participation that it is going to have in the experiment. All these things decide on the types of variables. So, and these types are not mutually exclusive. When I say that, for example, there could be an independent variable which is quantitative. There could be an independent variable which is qualitative, right? Similarly, a dependent variable can be quantitative, can be qualitative. These are like various categories, various ways of you dividing the variables into various types, right? So, so that is about types of variables. So I can go into details of these particular types of variables, but that itself takes one class to actually give examples on all these types. Okay, so hence I'm not going into details, but let me know in case if you want that. As I think we have already covered types of variable before, but any particular questions I can take you through.
Thank you, Praveen.
Yeah, I know it is a lot of information on this one small question, but unfortunately it is one single unit. So it is complete unit. So variable types is one unit in research method. So we can't really give examples for each and every variable type in a very short time.
Agree. Anyone has any question regarding variable? Or we're good? Okay.
I think we are. So I'll continue with Robert Sternberg.
Yeah.
Sternberg is an interesting fellow, and he has multiple theories about multiple things, and he likes the shape of a triangle. So all of his theories roams around a triangle. So the picture that you see on this very nice one, a green color has nothing to do with it, is his triarchic theory of love. He says there is three kinds of love. One is intimacy, the other one is commitment, and the third one is passion. And every, let's say, two people, be it your spouse, be it your friend, be it your parents, whoever, when two people are in love, somehow these three elements plays out. So the combination of those will be some kind of a let's say multiple combinations will be the way everyone is engaging in love towards another person. So for in this case, if you look at the leftmost one, when there is intimacy only in a relationship, that is liking, that is your feeling of love towards a friend, for example. And when on the rightmost bottom corner you have commitment, when there is only commitment, that's kind of a like that's more towards like a long-term committed relationship like marriage. And then there is only commitment and no intimacy, no passion. It's an empty love. So there is no other flavors of love. But in the left side down there is passion, and where is only like passion is called infatuation, and it's more like let's say one night stand kind of modern era kind of a love. So when there is intimacy and passion is romantic love, then there is intimacy and commitment, it's compassionate love, and then passion and commitment is fatuous love, and when all the three are combined together, it's called consummate love. That will be the love in the heaven. So that is how he explained his triadic theory of love, and I'm the expert on this. So if you have any questions, I can take it. Don't ask anything, please.
Yeah, Praveer,
I thought you were the expert.
Yeah, he ended up saying that he is an expert. You can ask anything related to that.
See, I was actually looking for this. Okay,
Love Guru.
he's there. Okay, good.
He also mentioned that this happens in heaven only.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
Not
let's
for
not-
us.
heaven, free Wi-Fi here. Okay, no more.
yeah, Praveen, I have a doubt. Can you give an example on passion plus commitment?
Passion plus commitment. So it's probably it's not okay. Passion plus commitment. You are having, let's say, but there is no intimacy. Let's say you are having a long-term relationship, like a long. What is it? A long-distance relationship. How does that work out? Sorry.
I don't think it's only related to a relationship between two people. When you're like you have a certain career option, you've made your hobby your career kind of a thing. You still have a passion and you're really committed to it. That also can be a fatuous love.
Okay, I was not actually aware of it.
Yeah,
But it's basically between the humans.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
In the
Because
human,
it
whatever.
says intimacy also. So
Again,
So
I need
two
the-
people should like each other. You know, your job cannot like you. Something that does not exist. I mean, it does exist, but not in that sense.
what I'm trying to say is you can actually implement this there also. I mean, this
But
can be
again,
portrayed there as well.
intimacy is lacking, right? So it is from both ends. So how is your work liking you? How is a thing liking you? It is between two people. It could be any person again.
that's my understanding also, Vasudha.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
It's a mutual relationship,
Okay, let's
basically.
go back to the original question. Who asked it and what was the question again? I probably derailed a little bit. You're talking about example of which one?
Example of
Yeah,
Facius.
passion
Facius
plus
love.
commitment.
Passion and commitment. But they don't like each other. In a marriage, there's commitment. There can be passion, but they don't like each other. Is it possible?
I doubt it, because if you are passionate about someone, you definitely do like them.
Okay, I
No,
can give an
it is-
example.
It is lacking in commitment. It is not about they like each other, but they don't have commitment between
Can
each
I
other.
give an
Facius
example
love-
of this?
Just a minute. Just a minute.
Hold
just a
on.
minute.
It's okay. In a marriage, think of a marriage where there is a kind of a man is very, let's say, ruling kinds, or a woman is a very
then there
nagging
is no-
kinds. Okay. In that
That-
case,
that
there is
way-
long-term commitment because they are in a marriage. There
But
can be
then there'll be
passion,
no passion.
but
There'll be no
intimacy
passion.
might be lagging.
Can
Vasudha,
I
you
give an
understood
example?
the meaning of passion in a wrong way. Here, passion means having strong sexual feeling towards someone.
That is what I'm
man said.
saying. That is what I'm
Right.
saying,
So
woman.
in a wedding between a man and a wife, there can be passion that is just having sexual feelings, and you're committed because you're into marriage. But there is no intimacy. Intimacy is as in, you can sit for hours and talk non-stop. Like you feel like talking to that person, you feel like sharing. So this intimacy is missing. So there is only sexual relationship plus commitment because they are into wedding. That's all.
Correct.
But the
So
problem
over
is
a
if
period
you're
of time,
fighting,
adding
no,
adding
if
on
you're-
to it. Sorry.
Just a minute, Bhashankar. If you're fighting constantly, there's a fight going on between the spouses constantly, the passion will burn out. No matter
So there is
how
no
much
love.
commitment.
That's what there is no
that's
love.
what- no,
Love,
there's no
love,
intimacy.
real love means intimacy plus passion plus commitment. So this is consummate love. So this is real love. So all these are just misconceptions of love, which is not love.
And
Guys,
Vasudha, I think you
also,
have a question. What is your question?
isn't there a difference between passionate and compassionate? It's we're not talking just about the sexual passion, right? Compassionate is different. It's more matured way of showing your feelings.
It's more emotional compared to physical. No?
Right.
Compassion
Yes.
That
Yes. It's
happens,
more
Geeta.
sympathy
That's
based.
there in intimacy. That's a part of
That will
intimacy.
come under intimacy, yes.
Okay.
No, that example what Seema has given related to the initial time of arranged marriage, where the guy's intention is about something related to the sexual infatuation, and because of that committed on the marriage part, he's more committed altogether. But over a period of time, with that longevity of the relationship, they create a kind of what you call the intimacy over a period of time.
They may or may not again.
May or may not, correct.
Yeah, good.
So these are
Yeah.
different
But,
forms of love, but not
Praveen,
love.
Praharsh, you told other than marriage, you give some other example. You told other relationship also, like father, daughter, or parents.
Yes. So, for example,
how
father-daughter,
it works here.
that's having a lot of intimacy. They are like can be very, very friendly, and there's long-term commitment because they are, blood relations, and definitely there's
No, about this passion plus commitment. How will give on this example?
Can I give an
Other
example?
than this marriage, yeah.
My own personal experience, can I share?
Yes, please. Are you sure you want to?
Please go ahead. It's
No
recording.
problem.
It is on
No,
record,
it's okay. Okay, fine. Anyway, so it's about, it's not towards a sexual aspect.
Right.
It's more related to attraction towards the women, basically, at the initial time when everybody will come over in the school times, right?
Commitment comes in.
Seeing future with that person. Seeing your
Yeah,
future
you're
with that
seeing your
person.
future with the person is what commitment means here. It is
Correct.
not about your what do you call it? Your perseverance to pursue them.
Yeah, it should not be like a stimuli for that response to the stimuli, kind of. Correct.
I didn't understand the last part, but I think that's clear now, right?
What
Any
did you
more
not
questions?
understand?
See, we don't have to again probably discuss it a lot. Basically, he was saying that these things can be broken down into 3 varieties, and a similar reflection will be seen in case of intelligence also. Then it will be probably easy to correlate. And this people are probably trying to put all kind of thoughts on it. It's a very simple theory. There's nothing much. There is three parts of it, and mixing and matching all the three, you get different flavors of it. As simple as that. Shall
Yeah,
we
so
move ahead?
basically, Praharsh, intimacy is more about the feeling part, right? You're feeling very strongly. Passion is more sexual or physical, and commitment is a long-term goal together. So that is
Correct.
how it is, right? Yeah.
And intimacy is a genuine feeling towards someone, a
It
positive
is
feeling.
also about
It's a
you
feeling.
having an intention to share certain things is also
Yes,
intimacy.
absolutely. Like, you know, a person returns back from work and he wants to share, he or she wants to share what all happened throughout the day. So they're very excited. So they, you know, have this, they also talk, they share a lot of things. So this is what is intimacy. So there is
Yeah,
no,
emotions basically. Emotions are what is intimacy, but physical attraction is passion. Right? It's
yes,
Correct.
physical and emotional. That's it.
yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions? This is such a captivating subject. People don't want to move ahead from this page.
Thanks, Guru.
Thank
Oh,
you. Praharsh.
you
Thank
forgot
you
a
so much
word before
for
that.
sharing.
The expert, the expert.
Yes. Okay. Thank God. Somehow we go to the next page.
God.
Okay. So that triangle can stay there now. We'll move to the intelligence part of it. So again, this fellow is very keen on breaking down things to a triangle. So he thought, okay, why do we really have this the big G general intelligence from the other fellow? Why can't I break down that also? And he did, and he came up with this idea that we have three types of intelligence. One is practical, one is creative, and one is analytical. And based on those three, yeah, thank you. Just keep on the next page. Yes, thank you. Here. So he said, okay, the practical one, we'll go in the reverse order. The analytical one is the one that Praveen just spoke about. Yeah, more like the concretized or crystallized kind of a this thing. And the creative one would be more like innovative ideas and things like that. That would be the part where you are kind of fluid. Your ideas are blossoming and things like that. And the practical one is probably the one flavor of wisdom. So he broke it down to three parts, not just two parts. The one Praveen was saying was two parts, where fluid intelligence, something that goes up till you are about 35, then goes down. By the way, I forgot to mention that after 35, if any of you are 35, the only thing that has scientifically proven to keep your fluid intelligence going, at least not falling very drastically, is doing heavy cardiovascular activities like playing tennis, running, or yoga and things like that. I forgot to mention that. Anyway, coming back here, so this guy broke it down into three parts. One is practical, which is kind of wisdom. Then is creative, which involves kind of fluid intelligence, and analytical, which is a combination of wisdom and fluid intelligence. So with the three of them, he came up with three sub theories of intelligence also, which is in the next page. So Hritika, please do the honors. Thank you. So sub theories, all this that we have, I can, okay, I'll give a gist again. So G is called covered. Yes, let's go here now. Contextual, experiential, and commodential subtheory. These subtheories are all aligned with these three types of wisdom that he came forth with. The contextual one is saying that intelligence is intertwined with the individual's environment. So more like practically how do you handle with environment. Thus, intelligence is based on the way one functions in their everyday circumstances, including one's ability to ABC. Now, you might remember this ABC from an example of how a teacher will handle her class. Adapt to one's environment where a class is noisy, teacher is new in the school, comes to a class, noisy children, how to handle them. Adapt to them is one possibility. Means mingle with them, say that I'm also like this, I also like to have fun like you, but for the time being, let's play, then let's study. After that, last 5 minutes, I'll give you to make halla gulla, something of the sort. Adapt to the environment. Second one is select the environment that suits yourself. Select the best environment for yourself. What do you do in this situation? You go to headmaster and say that I cannot take this class, give me some other class. So you probably go to a different class. So select a best environment that suits you. Third is to shape the environment. That would be to borrow a huge stick, go to the class the next day, hit 5 of the bigger heroes, and class kind of aligns back to you. So these 3 ways in which, so this was the example, kind of example, my version of it, that whichever man was teaching it gave us, I believe. So that's a good example. So that is how the contextual subtheory works, the practical way of intelligence works. Then there is then any questions on that, or okay, let's hold on to that. I'll take all the 3 subtheories, then we'll go back to questions. The experiential one. The experiential subtheory proposes that there is a continuum of experience that novel to automation to which intelligence can be applied. What is a novel one? That means something absolutely new. So this is a creative domain. It's at that extremes of this continuum that intelligence is at its best. So there's a continuum of this type of intelligence. The extreme ends, one is novelty and the other extreme is automation. And you might remember the novelty is you are presented with a problem, you bring in an absolutely cranky idea which no one has ever thought of. That's something like that. Now when that's also intelligence, extreme high intelligence. Now the other end of it is you become an expert in something so well that you can do it with your eyes closed and ears plugged. So you can do other things when you are handling this task. That be like let's say somebody is so good at cooking, that person will be able to listen to a very confusing and compounding, demanding kind of a story while the person is cooking, and still the food will turn out to be good because the cooking is so much into the person that he or she might be able to handle it in an automated fashion. So the extremes of this experiential one is one is the novel part, novelty, the new creative domain, and the other extreme would be the automation part of it. You are so expert in something that you can do it without any mental involvement. That's the second subtheory. And the third subtheory is the componential subtheory. The componential theory explains the various mechanisms that result in intelligence. According to Steinberg, the subtheory is comprised of 3 kinds of mental processes or components, and I'm going to go in reverse order in it. First is the knowledge acquisition. So you acquire the knowledge from your environment, which enable us to learn new information that will help us carry out our plans. Second is performance components. So you learn something, now you're going to use it. So second component, those helps us use the knowledge that we gathered and then take actions and plan our future and things like that. So basically you learn something, you are now using it. The third one would be meta component, which says it's more like we observe ourselves, like monitor and control and evaluate our own mental processing. It's like you are keeping a distance to yourself. You are evaluating yourself, how well you did in the previous set of actions that you did. Your intelligence was used in an intelligent way or not. So you go one level up. So you're basically analyzing not the situation and the solution. You're analyzing the way you analyze the situation and solutions. So you are one level up. That's called a meta components. So those 3 are the kinds of mental processes that we use according to Mr. Sternberg. Okay, and let's go to the next page also. I'm pretty sure we have covered all that, but let's see what is there in the next page. Okay, practical, creative, and analytical. We covered all that, all the 3 of them. Anyway, let me see if there is point missed out. Practical, knowledge, and IQ. Yes, we have covered all of it, but this one is a little more probably interesting. So if there are questions, I can take them now.
All clear.
Okay, very good. Well, these questions are again for the exams also. This could be both the questions about the triadic theories are important for for our exams also. So, and they're easy actually. It's nothing much, right? So, hopefully, I got you few marks now. Okay, let's move to the next person. Schema. Who is taking schema? I think Vasudha.
Yeah.
One second. So Vasudha, there's the schema left out and Piaget's stages, right?
Yeah.
Left out. So can we continue it tomorrow so that everything gets
problem.
over? What say? So that we don't
Yeah.
break in between, right?
I agree. We are already running out of time, and yes, and tomorrow let's be on time, everyone, please.
Yes.
Let's finish this.
No matter who
Just
comes
stop
and
the
who
recording.
doesn't, we'll start at 8:30.
Sharp. Awesome.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Ritu said,
Ritika, could you stop
clear
recording?
because- Ritu, you said all clear because you took that class, है ना?
Hey, I